Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'll be showing y'all how to, well, prime and prep these guys. If you hate the building process, then this will be a lifesaver, but if you love it, then they already come in the box. So, what can I say? So here I'm just getting off little mold lines. So, you can see I'm just kind of pointing out all the little areas. It's a good idea to just find where the spots are, so that way when you go through a unit of guys like the crossbowmen, we're going to do the guards or the sworn swords, and you have like 12, 24, whatever, then you know the common spots where the actual lines will show up. And so here I'm using the back of the blade and I'm just scraping it off. Rarely would you use the front of the blade, just because you can cut into it pretty easily, especially if it's quite sharp, if you got new ones like I did recently. So I would be pretty cautious about using that front edge, because it can very easily just start digging into the plastic and it'll ruin the material. For me, I never really like having that pure, clean, like, oh, we're ready to go into battle off the factory floor. I like having my miniatures a little rugged, and it also depends on the lore and the commission I'm doing. So if someone wants it like that, then I'm happy to do it for them. But personally, I do like those dents. So you can see here, it's about digging in and kind of not overdoing it. Here you can see I'm going to be doing some sword cuts. So you do have to over exaggerate it a little bit, because the primer will fix it up by filling in the little marks there. But if it's to scale, it's going to be hardly noticeable. What's the purpose of doing all this if it's not going to be noticeable? So you do have to make sure it is a decent amount. Don't make it significant where like half the head is split, because then the person won't be really standing anymore. So just keep that in mind. Now here I'm going to be doing kind of like blunt damage. So like more of a mace or an axe head, kind of dented against the armor, instead of like a sword kind of scratching it. And so the main idea overall with this damage is to kind of exaggerate it, because sword scratches are not going to be that three-dimensional. This kind of damage won't be either, but the idea is to give it that sort of workability that you can take advantage of when you're painting it. If it's just not not deep enough and is very hard to see, then how are you going to really paint it on? I mean, there are painting techniques where you don't even have physical scratches, you just kind of work them in yourself, and that's perfectly acceptable. But I do just like adding that extra layer of texture. Bye now. Anyway, you can see the ridge and the feather line on the helm are definitely not mold lines. So I just wanted to point that out, that some things might appear like mold lines, and you can actually kind of fudge things. So what was a mold line could actually be kind of like a detail in the armor, but oftentimes it's a little obvious and a little ugly. Now I'm going to be adding some texture to the armor. You can do this as well, maybe even make it harsher if you want to, especially like veteran looking soldiers. Like, I'd recommend this especially for the Starks, since a lot of them are supposed to be kind of like bearded men. You could definitely give them like an older feel to them, and so this kind of gives you that extra layer of depth, and it gives you that cool aesthetic of like lived in armor rather than very polished, very perfect looking. now we come on to the Flayed Men. These are probably one of my most favorite models of the range so far. I just think they're awesome, and they are a bit tricky. So I do want to kind of give some advice on that. I didn't find too many mold lines, but that kind of worries me because I feel like there's going to be a lot that will pop up later just because of how massive they are and all the bits on them. But I think that they're definitely a different beast compared to the infantry. The archers, you know, the footmen, all that, they're very simple in terms of their detail, which does make them easier to paint. And I do notice they have quite a few mold lines, but here I feel maybe they disguise them a lot better. But that gave me plenty of time to focus more on the damage I would want to give them. So first of all, I roughed them up quite a bit using like the front and back of the blade just to scratch all over the armor and the cape just to add that roughness to them. I feel they would be very rugged, just, you know, punching through the forests and all kinds of lands, you know, chasing down their prey. And they would also be like, you know, slamming to infantry. So the, you know, the front of the horse, the shield, you know, the shoulders, the helmet, the breastplate of the, pardon me, the actual rider would be taking quite a few hits. Not even just from like people purposely striking at them, but, you know, just you know, someone's shoulder just getting smacked by the horse, or, you know, like swords, you know, being flown through the air when he smacks someone with that you know, nasty weapon of his. So I did want to kind of do these guys justice by adding in quite a few nicks and saying like these guys are toughened and they're ready to hunt. And I think that'll add a lot of their to their, you know, cool factor. Like they're supposed to be quite intimidating rules wise. So I think like them saying like we took so many hits, but we have a 2+ armor. You know, you're gonna have to work pretty hard to take us down. You know, because we're the most expensive, but we're some of the meanest guys there is. So yeah, there's the unit. You can see some of the scratches, but quite a few are quite hard to notice. And so that's kind of the intention, is you could do a few major ones and highlight that with the painting and really show those off. But the majority of this kind of work would be if you're trying to examine them up close. So this is the Stark Characters Pack. One thing I really enjoyed about doing these was how easy it was. There are very few mold lines to see. One issue I found was that some parts of like their cloaks were a little bit rough in texture, so I kind of like did my best to smooth that off by just kind of scraping away that like weird kind of bumpiness, scratchiness. But you can also mix that in. Anyway, so now we're getting on to priming, and I just wanted to show off what kind of techniques you should be doing. For me, I like just kind of, you know, doing bursts. That's what a lot of people I've watched recommended. So I put it in warm water, and it usually will stay in there for a few minutes, and I'll keep putting it back in when I'm not using it. Shake it really well, and then I just give it a decent base coat. What I'm doing here is just showing off how what you know, spraying can do to detail if you do it a lot of times. So for the first one I did 1, second one I did 2, and so on. And so you can see the first few are, you know, ready to go almost instantly. They're ready to handle. Maybe they're slightly tacky, but the last few are definitely gonna stain your fingers with the priming you know, material. So you can see they're very crisp the first few, but as you go on, you see this like real ugly kind of lumpiness to them, and it might be hard to see, but the edges are definitely soft. And you think about what happens to a model's face when you do a really heavy coat of primer, and it could just be 3 or 4 coats, not even 6, and it will really mess up the crispness of the model. And that's one thing I'm trying to aim for, and I think everyone should, is just having a very crisp model to work with. Obviously, the most crisp is out of the sprue, or assembled without any priming. So obviously you want the paint to stick on, of course, so you have to do some sort of priming. So for me, I would rather do it lighter than heavier, because at least with lighter, if it's frustrating me, right, I'll just know next time, just do a little more primer, right? But it's just to get it stuck on, and as you'll see, I don't get 100% perfect coverage. It's just getting the general area ready. So I'm putting on the black right now, and then I'll be putting on the gray and white and higher angles. So the gray will be kind of on the higher areas, and white I'll just be doing straight from above. So that'll give me a nice gradient of color, so I can see where the highlights are going to be, as well as actually physically lightening up the paint when I put it on the base. If I do it too thick, then of course, none of this work is going to matter. But if I'm quite careful, then it'll definitely work to my favor. And so what I'm doing here is just quickly going through. You should be careful about rattle can, which I don't know if anybody else has said this, but 2 cans I've used already have broke because I've been shaking them absent-mindedly. I've let them go flying, and the top has whacked against the ground, and of course it's just a little plastic tube holding it on, so of course it's gonna break off. So you have to buy another of the same kind. So now I have to go out and get an Army Painter Gray, because the one I've been using, the top snapped off. But I have to say, the Army Painter primer works really, really well. But also the I think it's called like Dark Armory or whatever, the cheap kind I've been using. There's a lot of paint in it. You just have to make sure you shake it really well, but by warming it up, it actually means that it gets ready to go in no time. Like, you'll hear that consistent rattle clinking. If you do it cold, it takes a really long time to shake it up, but if you warm it up in water, then it works like a charm. So now you can see I will be spraying the Bolton Flayed Men, and so I'm just going through the same steps. Of course, I don't have a gray now because I broke it, so make sure you don't do what I did, right? Here is the beautiful lineup of all the minis I've prepped and primed. I will intend to do a painting tutorial on every single cool mini or not release of A Song of Ice and Fire, so stay tuned for that. Have a wonderful day.